David Kinane from Banter Speech and Language here, and today I want to show you a study skill that's really useful in all sorts of places. 3 steps to remember any 10 things in order. So there are 3 steps to memorizing a list of 10 things. The first thing is we need a system. So we're going to put some time into learning a really simple peg system. Now these pegs are going to act almost like hooks for us to attach items on our list to. Now there are lots of different systems out there. Probably the easiest one, and the one I'm going to demonstrate today, is called the number peg system. And you'll see why it's called that in a little while. Once we've got our system in place, and it will only take a few minutes, we will then get our list. Obviously, if we don't have a list, there's nothing to remember, and this will be a very short video. The third step is we're going to assign each item in our list to one of the pegs in our memory system. We're then going to spend some time vividly associating the image of the peg with the image of the item. This is probably best understood if I give you a demonstration. So let's get started. So let's start with our pegs. Number 1 looks a little bit like a magic wand. And you can see the magic wand that I use tends to have these little stars sticking out of the top. You can use a paintbrush or a pencil or anything that looks that shape. Just something that looks like a number 1 that you're going to remember. Number 2 looks a little bit like this white swan. Now, I don't know why, but I always find it easier to remember white swans over black swans, even though I grew up in Ballarat, which, as people from Ballarat will know, has lots of black swans. For some reason, the white swans are more memorable for me, probably due to some Hans Christian Andersen when I was, very impressionable as a young man. Number 3, you need to use your imagination for this one. It's a love heart to me that is tipped onto its side. As you can see, I've got one with petals here. There's some thorns hidden in it. And again, all of these things will help us remember when we come to actually tie something to our pegs in just a little while. Number 4, to me, looks like a yacht. Not just any yacht, but one with beautiful white sails billowing on the calm ocean. Number 5 looks a little bit like a hook. And the hook that I've got in my mind looks a little bit like this one, but it's the kind of hook you use when somebody's really terrible and you want to get them off stage. You know, the one that's used in all those cartoons? That's the one. Number 6, I use a cartoon bomb. It's sort of shaped a little bit like a 6, and it's really easy to remember things because you can always imagine that sizzling, sparking, smoking top that bombs have, even cartoon bombs, especially in cartoons. Number 7, I always use a very dramatic idea of a cliff, a plunging cliff like this one. And as you can see, it's got a little bit of a number 7. And this is really useful because you can use the cliff with all sorts of objects to help you remember them. Number 8, well, that's easy. I use an hourglass. Very dynamic picture. It's got sand going through it. Really easy to tie images to. Number 9, I use a balloon. Now, the one in my mind is actually a red balloon, but I couldn't find a red balloon today, so a purple balloon is going to have to be the one that we use. Whatever kind or color of balloon you use, try to make it memorable. And finally, 10, well, for me, it's a fork and it's a plate. And that's really easy to remember things because you can always have things on the plate. You can always have the fork stabbing into something that you have to remember. Now, let's find out how to use the pegs to remember things. So here's a tip. Now, your pegs will stay exactly the same. So regardless of how many lists of 10 items I've memorized over the years, my memory pegs have stayed exactly the same. So it's worth spending some time up front making your 10 number pegs as memorable as possible. Now, we know from the research around making things memorable that there are some things that you can do to make each of your images easier to remember. The first is to bring in some of your other senses. So obviously, being an image peg, you're focusing mainly on vision, but there's nothing to stop you adding sounds or smells or textures to each of your pegs to make them even more memorable. The second thing you want to do is you want to add movement. So instead of having your pegs sort of sitting there in a static sort of way, have them spin or shake or bounce or swing or stretch or any other movement that you find is particularly memorable. It really makes the pegs much easier to envisage when you're trying to remember what is that sixth item? What is it? So here's a simple list to practice on. Let's start with the shopping list. So here are 10 things. Let's pretend that we've been asked to get these 10 things by our significant other or a parent or another relative. And we have to, for some reason, we have to memorize them in order. So here we go. We need to remember eggs, milk, chocolate cake, bread, orange juice, watermelon, mango, light bulbs, toothpaste, and coffee. Now, how do we remember them? Let's go to the pegs. So, of course, we now know the numbers 1 to 10, and hopefully we're unlikely to forget how to count to 10. We've now got a really vivid image or a peg associated with each of the numbers, tied very much to what the number looks like. And again, with a bit of practice, we're very unlikely to forget our pegs. So now it's time for us to start associating each of the items on our list, in this case our shopping list, with the pegs. So how do we do that? And this is a bit weird, this little part, because what we're trying to do is to make an association between the peg and the item we're trying to remember. And in general, the weirder the association, the more memorable it will be. So sometimes this feels a little bit silly, but hang in there with me and you'll see that it works. So how are we going to associate a magic wand with some eggs? Well, the way that I would do it is I imagine my magic wand with the sparkling stars coming out of the top, and I imagine plunging my magic wand into an egg, right into the yolk of the egg, and the egg sort of explodes and the yolk spills out, and lo and behold, the egg magically, because of our magic wand, becomes 2 eggs. Then it becomes 4 eggs. Then it becomes a dozen eggs. Exactly what we're trying to remember. Number 2, you'll remember that our image for number 2 is a swan, and we're trying to remember the shopping list item for milk. For me, I look at the white swan and I think about white milk, and the association is obvious. I imagine a white swan swimming in a beautiful lake filled with really thick, creamy milk. And in fact, I guess the swan could be trying to camouflage in with the milk. We can barely see it because, of course, the swimming swan and the milk are the same colour. Number 3 is kind of an easy one, and sometimes you get ones that just naturally go. I just imagine a chocolate mud cake in the shape of a love heart, and we get our spoon and we scoop into it, and what do we find? We find deep chocolate mud cake inside our heart-shaped chocolate cake. Easy to remember, right? Number 4, and you'll remember the image for this is our yacht. And what I do is I imagine the yacht with its billowing white sails, but instead of sails made of canvas, my sails are made of white pieces of bread. And because the bread is so delicious and so thick and so soft, there's millions of seagulls flying around the yacht, pecking bits of bread off the sails. Very memorable, lots of movement. Number 5, now you might remember my image for this that's in my head is the kind of hook that you hook people off stage when they're terrible. And so I've got in my mind an image of a particular stand-up comedian that I don't like. I won't say who it is, but I've got a specific person and you should too. And we're using the hook to yank him off stage because he's so terrible. And he's so bad, he trips on the edge of the stage and he tumbles into a huge glass of orange juice. And he's not a very good comedian, he's not a good swimmer, and he's flailing about trying to get his head above the orange juice, which is sticky and running down his glasses and his face. That's how I remember orange juice for number 5. Number 6, a watermelon. How are we going to remember the image of a watermelon tied to a bomb? Well, I imagine that there's a cartoon bomb, the sillier the better, buried inside a watermelon. And as the bomb explodes, shards of watermelon go everywhere. They get in people's hair, they get in people's clothes. It's pink and it's sticky and all the pips are everywhere. And it's just a horrible mess. I also imagine the explosion, the sound of the bomb, and the watermelon just coating the walls in pink. And it really helps me to remember. Number 7, and you'll remember with number 7 that our image is a sheer cliff that looks a little bit like this one in my mind. It might even be steeper than this one. Now, how are we going to remember a mango? Now, sometimes the thing we're trying to remember doesn't naturally go with our image. Sometimes it does, like with our chocolate cake earlier, and it's fantastic, but other times it doesn't. What can we do? Well, we use our principles of making things memorable. And so what I try to do is tell myself a little story about a guy standing on the edge of the cliff, and he's got himself one of those amazing mangoes, the first mango of the season, and it's so succulent and it's so delicious that all the mango juice is pouring down his chin, down his chest, and is falling all the way down the cliff, and it's splashing all the way down the cliff into the ocean, and it's turning the ocean sort of a mango color. Now, you may have noticed I've had to spend a bit more time making this image memorable to me, and that's because I don't naturally have a good connection between a mango and a cliff, so I have to work a little bit harder at it. And from time to time, you'll find that there are images like that where you do need to spend a couple of extra seconds, but you do get better at it as you go. Now, our next number is number 8, and you'll remember our image for number 8 is a light bulb. Is an hourglass. We're trying to remember the light bulb. And so what I try to do is think of these really fat classical light bulbs, the old-fashioned ones before LEDs, and we're trying to crush them down through this hourglass. And they're too big. They get stuck in the hourglass, but the hourglass is full of pressure and it crushes these light bulbs down, and you can hear the crushed glass as it tries to force its way down, and it crushes itself with such force that it ends up being kind of like this sandy material on the bottom, which of course ties in really clearly with our idea of an hourglass. But you have to think of that light bulb. Don't lose the idea of the light bulb in the hourglass. And so for me, what I also have is the light bulb flashing, kind of fritzing out on me as it's going through the hourglass. Number 9, well, as you know, in my memory system, I've got a red balloon, but for today, we've got a purple balloon. And so what I'm doing is I'm going to tie an enormously huge tube of toothpaste to the end of my red balloon or purple balloon. And then I'm going to imagine myself trying to catch the balloon and jumping on the toothpaste. The toothpaste is sort of erupts out of the top of the tube and just absolutely covers the ground and the balloon with toothpaste. Easy to remember that way. And number 10, well, we've got our fork and our plate. We're trying to remember coffee. So I imagine that I've done something really bad. I've forgotten to tell my wife when I'm going to be home for dinner. She spent all this time making me an amazing dinner, and I've just forgotten all about it. And so what have I done? Well, I get home, there's just a fork and a bare plate, and I sort of stupidly say, where's my dinner? And without even any warning, my wife runs across the room with scalding hot coffee, and she just pours it straight out over the plate, splashes onto the fork, splashes probably onto my lap, and I deserve it because I've been acting really badly, and I get burnt and everything's miserable. But you know what? I love the smell of coffee, and so it's not all bad. And so, as you can see, I've used a number of senses there. I've told myself a little story about it, and I've really associated the coffee spilling over the plate and splashing onto the fork. All things that are going to help me remember the list. So once I've spent a couple of minutes building these frankly ridiculous associations between my memory pegs and the items on the list that I'm trying to remember, what I then set off to do is to test myself. I want to check that my images are good enough to stick. So let's see in live time whether I can do it. Let's have a look. So the first item that comes up is item number 7. I've got to figure out what item number 7 is on my list. Can you remember? Well, I imagine my person standing on the edge of the cliff and he's eating a succulent. What was it? It was a mango. Next item, we're looking for the first item on our list. That immediately brings to memory the magic wand. What do we associate with the magic wand? Well, I imagine very clearly that my magic wand has plunged into almost a thicket of eggs. Did you get it? All right, number 6 is the next thing. It's the bomb. What's the number 6 thing on our list? Let me think. Aha, I can see something pink splattered all over the walls. What's pink? It's got pips. Aha, that's it. Did you get it? It's watermelon. Number 5, I've got my terrible comedian who will remain nameless. We've yanked him off stage. He's tripped on the side of the stage after being hooked. And what's he tumbled into? A huge glass of, did you get it? Orange juice. Number 10. Who can forget number 10? This is me being a very bad husband and sort of asking for dinner, and I'm late and I haven't called ahead. And my wife spent a long time making a proper dinner. I don't get my dinner. What do I get? That's right. My plate and my fork, number 10, gets covered in coffee. This is an easy one. Number 2, the second item on the list. Well, 2 looks like our swan. As you can see, the swan's white. And from memory, there was some camouflage involved. What's white that we could have our swan swimming around in? You remember? It's obvious and easy, isn't it? It is milk. Our purple balloon, which for me is red. I seem to remember something heavy was tied to the end of it, dragging it down. I know, it was a huge tube of toothpaste that I then stomped on, and the toothpaste went absolutely everywhere. I've got to get some toothpaste. This was an easy one. Number 3 on the list. And, well, it's usually pretty easy to remember chocolate cakes, isn't it? But it was a chocolate cake. It was a heart-shaped chocolate mud cake. And that's easy to remember. Oh, the next one, the hourglass, number 8 on our list. Now, what was it? Something was going through our hourglass and it was crinkling and crunching, and the pressure was almost converting it to sand. It was flashing and fritzing. Aha! Did you get it? Light bulb. So there you go. We got 100% on our self-test. Now, I know this seems a bit weird, and it's almost a bit of a gimmick when you start using it. You can't believe that it's actually so easy to do. But I encourage you to go out there and give it a go. Find any list of 10 things in any place, from a list of facts to a shopping list, and just try it out. You'll find it's amazingly interesting to do. Now, I hope you find this PEG system useful. There's a lot more information out there if you're looking for information about PEG systems. This is called the number PEG system. There are countless numbers out there, including alphabet systems and master memory systems. If you're interested in it, there's a lot of free information out there via Google. Just Google PEG memory systems. I first heard about PEG systems, I think, back in junior high school, but since then they've been popularized by a number of people, including Tony Bazan, and he's got some great books, including Master Your Memory. Anyway, hope you found it useful. Get out there, give it a go. If you find it useful, please let me know. Either send me a message or make a comment down below. Good luck.